The recent stories which have come to light of countless rape gangs across the UK and the total failure of the authorities to tackle them led to the UK government appointing Baroness Louise Casey to undertake a national audit of the nature, scale and characteristics of gang-based exploitation. It's worth taking a moment to consider one of her comments. She said, "That term group-based child sexual exploitation is actually a sanitised version of what it is. I want to set it out in unsanitised terms. We are talking about multiple sexual assaults committed against children by multiple men on multiple occasions, beatings and gang rapes." As Baroness Casey has suggested, sanitised versions of the story have been far more widespread than honest reporting. All too often terms like assaults or abuse have been used to avoid confronting the reality of mass gang rapes taking place here in the UK and the horrific consequences of them, including abortion on an enormous scale. I'm Catherine Mokler and this is Viewpoint. Maggie Oliver is an ex-police officer who had been raising this issue for 22 years and who established the Maggie Oliver Foundation to empower victims of childhood sexual abuse and exploitation, including the hundreds of victims of rape gangs. What drew me to her story was how the gangs were found out. She mentions Operation Augusta, which was an investigation into abuse in Manchester, where she discovered clusters of gangs that were bringing girls into other towns for more abuse. In 2024, they had up to 100 suspects, most of whom were men of Asian ethnicity. Again, the Casey report is clear and points out that authorities have, in Baroness Casey's words, shied away from recording or identifying ethnic identity, although she goes on to point out that she found disproportionate numbers of men from Asian ethnic backgrounds among suspects. In the case of the Manchester gangs, after Maggie Oliver returned to work from looking after her sick husband, she was told that the 97 abusers only received a warning under the Child Abduction Act, and the 26 victims received no justice. They deliberately closed down the case and wouldn't put resources into it. In 2010, one of Maggie's colleagues discovered an aborted baby stored in a freezer, where evidence was normally held for police. A detective chief superintendent told Maggie that the baby belonged to a 13-year-old girl called Ruby, who in 2009 was raped by a married father of 3. Ruby had gone to an abortion centre for an abortion where a member of staff phoned the police. When the police arrived, they took the aborted baby away as evidence but did nothing with it. They put it in a freezer for about a year until it was found. Maggie was obviously horrified that they had left their biggest piece of evidence, an innocent dead baby, in a freezer while a dangerous predator was on the loose. Despite this, Maggie persevered and managed to work with Ruby's sister Amber. After some months getting to know them, Ruby finally disclosed to Maggie that she was raped from the ages of 12 to 14 by 6 men. Ruby, who had special needs, also said there had been a list on the door of the room where she was raped with the names of men who had raped her and other girls. At this point, Maggie went to the head of Greater Manchester Police, Chief Constable Peter Fahey, but was warned to be very careful about what she chose to do with the information she'd uncovered. Soon afterwards, Maggie sent in a grievance to Greater Manchester Police, accusing the force of knowingly failing in their duty to properly investigate the horrendous crimes of child sexual exploitation. She believed they were allowing offenders to escape justice and failing to protect the most vulnerable in society. In May 2012, 9 men were convicted of being part of a child sexual exploitation ring in Greater Manchester. Among them was Ruby's rapist, who received 8 years after he was charged with the lesser offence of conspiracy to engage in sexual activity with a child, even though he had fathered a child with her. In October 2012, Maggie resigned from Greater Manchester Police to tell her story. She has been a voice for the voiceless in her decade-long fight for justice since then. Commenting on Baroness's Casey's report, Home Secretary Yvette Coopers said that she had identified a deep-rooted failure to treat children as children and a continued failure to protect children and teenage girls from rape, exploitation and serious violence. The Home Secretary also pointed out that on an ethnicity data, Casey reported a continued failure to gather proper, robust national data. Yet local police data revealed clear evidence of overrepresentation among suspects of Asian and Pakistani heritage men in rape gang cases. The appalling trend to me seems that those in power were tough on children and not tough on those abusing them. It had to take discovering the body of a dead baby in a freezer for the rest of the pieces to click. This story should unite every one of us to end violence against children, both born and unborn. We don't want these sick crimes to happen, and we want justice no matter how long it takes. Tragically, the barbaric reality of exploitation and abortion is that predators can now use the pills by post service to further conceal their crimes and abuse their victims. In reality, it's all too easy for abortion pills to be falsely obtained under the pills by post scheme, enabling abusers to coerce women into abortions. At a recent parliamentary event hosted by SPUC, we presented the findings of a project devised to see how easily abortion pills can be obtained under false pretenses from providers over the phone. A team of 26 volunteers made a total of 85 phone calls that provided fake information and profiles. In all 26 cases, pills were successfully obtained through the post. The event, titled Pills by Post, an abuser's secret weapon, also exposed how dangerous the pills by post policy is. SPC has also continued to warn about the reality of abortion coercion, which as many as 15% of British women, according to a BBC poll, say that they have experienced in some form. The Casey report and more grooming gang prosecutions have brought to light not just the horrific consequences of this type of exploitation, but also it has led to abortion on an enormous scale. Maggie Oliver has created a campaign called #TheyKnew, where barristers, lawyers and investigators aim to highlight failures as they speak to victims and survivors within the system in a bid to support them. It's clear we need to push for new laws, funding and leadership that actually prioritises child protection. Silence is complicity, whether it's sexual abuse, trafficking or coerced abortion. The common thread is the systematic exploitation of the vulnerable. And what continues to haunt me is the question, how many more children could have been protected if these warnings had been taken seriously years ago? There's a quote from one of my favourite films, which is The Sound of Freedom, about Tim Ballard, who rescued thousands of children from trafficking. And he says, "It's funny because we all read history and we think, oh, I would have risen up, I would have fought, I would have been an abolitionist." And I tell them, no, you wouldn't have. If you would have, you'd be doing that right now. You know, trafficking exists. You've heard of it, but you don't want to look. We all need to make sure we don't fall into the trap of silence.